Hey, how's it going there? It's Kron here with a video on quest making. Uh, this specifically is about making quests in Discord using Google Docs as kind of an archive or a compendium to store the information, and then Avrae is the bot for dice rolling and controlling the monsters and the map and so forth. However, a lot of the topics that we'll go over can be transferred to DMing and quest writing in other settings as well. But we specifically will be focusing on those three, and specifically also within the server Hanua. So, I am the Chronicler, as you probably already know if you're watching this. Okay, so making a new quest. The point of this video is to help guide you, the quest maker, on the road to success, making a successful quest, right? Now, what makes a good quest? There's a lot of different elements to that. There's no way in this video I can cover every single one of those elements, or even I, as the designer, can know every single one of those elements, because ultimately a quest is a lot of different things, right? But there's only so many ways that I, with my limited perspective, can express it. So think of this guide, think of this video rather, as a guide with guardrails and not a railroad. You don't have to follow all of the guidelines in here. There are some things that you'll kind of want to stick to, quest balancing, enemy balancing, and so forth, in order to keep the quest engaging. But as far as how to add to the quest or what sort of obstacles the players have to actually overcome, what is the point of the quest, this sort of thing is still really up in the air and up to you as a designer. And I want it to be. To quote the Reapers, by using mass relay technology, your society develops along the paths we desire, right? Basically, the Reapers said, hey, we're putting the mass relay technology out, and then as a result, all of the technology that the future races build are based on that technology, right? And it makes them very easy for the Reapers to exploit because it's all just replication, right? I don't want that. Use this again as a guide, but I don't want this to be strict and narrow and have it be the only way that you develop the quests and have the things that are said here be the only things you consider as you consider making a quest. Certainly the things here are not the only things that I've considered before when I've made some of the quests. Always keep pushing. Sticking to the playbook was never the point of me making this Hanua server with Discord and Nav. You always want to push the envelope and think big, right? So don't feel constrained by what's here. It's the foundation. One quick note, though, on complexity and randomness versus simplicity and predictability. You kind of want both in a quest. If a quest is too complex and has too much randomness to it, that can kind of turn people off. Not necessarily choice paralysis, but just not knowing what to expect, right? If things are constantly changing. And it can also be very hard for DMs to run, too. If there's 32 different ways that the quest can be run, that's a lot, like maybe 8 different enemy types or something like that, like obviously, if you have different encounter tables with multiple encounters, yeah, there can be a lot of different combinations, right? But, at the same time, there's the predictability of, well, these are the tables, this is what it's going to be, there are these encounters, that sort of thing. So, you don't want to make it too complex. You don't want to make things too random, but then at the same time, you don't want to make it too simple and too predictable either, because then things can just become really exploitable, which, once a player is 5 or 6 levels above the recommended level range for a quest, they're probably not going to be threatened by what's there, right? But those players that are in the level range, it shouldn't ever just be a cakewalk, right? Like, they might have some abilities that really help them to exploit the quest, but there should always still be a chance for failure when they're in that level range. Okay, moving on. And again, these are just things to consider as the baseline kind of foundation when you're making a new quest. within Hanua. So I don't want my thinking to become your thinking. Use it as the foundation for your thinking, right? Okay, so picking a faction. This is one of the more important things that you can do for the quest. We've got a little list of the factions up there in the top corner. If you need some inspiration for where you can get one. So when you're making a quest, check for other quests from that faction in the similar level range. So in other words, if the Order of the Elk already has a quest in the 2 to 3 level range, and you want to make a quest in the 2 to 3 level range, maybe don't do the Order of the Elks. Maybe like try to increase the level range somehow. See if you can make one of the enemies a little stronger, replace it with a stronger enemy, maybe increase the number of enemies or increase the challenge somehow. If there's an alternate condition besides just bonking all the enemies on the head, right? See if you can, do that. Play with the level range somehow, but try not to have repeat quests, or rather quests for the same faction in the same level range. Try to get some diversity. Or if you really want to stick with that level 2 to 3 level range quest, right? Because you're in love with those enemies and that map that you found, find a different faction, find a different way to spin it, or maybe two factions are working together on this, and one of them is really in charge of like the quest distribution and the reward. The other one's just kind of ancillary, kind of like the Shadows, for instance. You get Consulate and Elks rep for that, but it's really the Elks that are kind of running the quest. So speaking of which, the reward should match the faction. If you go through and you look at the list of quests, you'll be able to start to draw out some similarities here. For example, quests for the Consulate tend to give healing potions and lots of just straight up gold, right? Quests from the Elks tend to give reputation and IOUs, right? So like, hey, here's this spellcasting voucher because we don't have a whole lot of money to pay you. The Vahikane are kind of the same way, right? The Ikaika, meanwhile, their quests, they don't have a whole ton of money lying around, but they do have challenges, right? Like, they're already seasoned fighters, so their quests are going to be ones that are above and beyond the level of even their people, right? Or something that they don't want to risk using their people on. So, yeah, think about that as you're considering the faction and the reward. What does the faction actually really realistically have to offer? If it's the Maquis, they've got Smyglar working for them in the basement. Getting potions is not really a problem for them, nor magic items, considering the fact that they kind of run the underground magic items. Same with the Moon Clan. Arcs and quests give magic items as well. So, just keep that in mind. The reward should match the quest giver. Completing the quest also should help the faction somehow, and as we already mentioned here for the Ikaika, it should be something that a faction would prefer adventurers or freeblades do over their own people. Either it's risky, or they don't want their people to be directly involved in it. Like there's some business, like if the Ikaika want business done within the city, they can't officially do that themselves from the law of the Consulate, so they will sometimes hire adventurers to go and do things for them within the city, right? So that way there's that degree of separation between what the Ikaika want done and them actually doing it. And then for higher level quests or confidential quests, like the Roper, for instance, consider a reputation prerequisite or other prerequisites for participation. This can be for a few different reasons. One, it makes people feel cool, right? Like, hey, here's another reason why I want to get this reputation. Here's another reason why I want to be in with this group, right? But also, it can be a good way to, if the quest is kind of like lower risk, higher reward in the grand scheme of things. You know what I'm talking about, people, like the Roper. That reputation minimum can keep like level 1s, 2s, 3s from just getting power leveled through right from the get-go, right? So it can be a good way in a quest where it might be easier to kind of like tank the damage, to keep like one tank from just bringing 4 level 1s through and just being like, let's go, we're doing this 5 times, which can still happen, like look at the Hydra. But, that's just something to consider. There are multiple ways to kind of balance that, right? If you feel like, well, I'm not going to have enough enemy groups to really threaten lower level players that try to tag along, consider just making a reputation minimum or some other kind of minimum for participation. All right. So details on the quest. This is that little paragraph where the quest-giving faction is telling you what they want done and why, right? Now, this is probably the most important part of the quest, because without it, it just kind of like we lose the suspension of disbelief. Players don't really know what they need to do. It's like the question that must be answered, right? And if we don't ask this question properly, the players are going to come to us with an answer that's insufficient. So quest details. First off, the quest has to be repeatable. Like Fret's Valentine's Day quest, it can be repeatable a limited number of times, right? So, hey, go get me these X number of love letters, and then once it's done, it's done. Or it can be repeatable ad nauseum, right? But it must be repeatable. Unless you want to make an event quest, right? Which, again, guidelines, not railroad. So in the quest details, you should include the why so that players understand, I call it the impact versus intent, right? When successful completion is concerned. So they finished the quest, right? Okay, we did it. We finished the quest. What does that actually look like, though? For example, those of you who are familiar with the quest Treasure Island, the Morkoth quest, what does success in that quest look like? Is it killing all the Morkoth's guardians and looting the Morkoth's lair and then leaving the island? No. You might get all that loot. You'll get all the experience from the creatures that you killed, or the players will, rather, but they will not get the quest reward from the Vahikane, because the objective of the quest is to kill the Morkoth. And that's clearly stated, right? So we want to clearly state that, not only in the objective line, but also in the description itself. And that's another reason, why the why is so important, because it helps to remind players, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. Some quests can have singular objectives. They can have multiple objectives, primary and secondary objectives. For example, if you look at the Ghostbusters quest, the kind of like the mid-level 10 to 12 level Elks quest, you need to go save some human cultists that are being indoctrinated by the race and the servants of hunger, right? So you get players rather get rewards based on different circumstances. Did they kill the wraith? Did they save any humans? What exactly happened? Did they do both? Depending on what they do, they get different kind of like levels of rewards, right? Sometimes like any one of those can be enough. One of them can be a primary objective. One can be a secondary objective. So consider that as you're making the quest. What exactly is the objective of the quest? What are they trying to do? Or like the Gazer quest, right? Where the objective is, hey, go find a Gazer. Maybe you find one, maybe you find two. So the culture and the lore of the city and or current events. This is a big one too, especially if you're tying it into the faction. For example, if you're doing a quest with the Wood Elves, for instance, they are hugely tied up in with the current events of the city. Same thing with the Moon Clan. So consider current events and the faction's agenda, right, as you are considering what they want done and how doing this is advantageous to the faction. If you have questions about this, ask them. Ping an adept or a GM and, figure out some more about the lore, or go through and dig up some more about the lore of the city yourself. So it's all right there, ready to be searched. And then finally, we generally want to try to include some like new monsters in the quest. It's okay to have like those same old standbys, like Bandit. Okay, Bandit's going to be there in a lot of quests. But we want to try to sometimes have some new variety, right? Or have it be like, oh, it's that quest, it's the Roper quest, it's the Hydra quest, it's the Dinosaur quest. People know what it is based on how you call it, right? So having that new monster or a new NPC, like the Fret quest, right? Like, hey, here's an NPC that I want to make specifically for this quest. Maybe they're a part of the faction, or maybe they are an individual, right? You're like, I don't want to do one of the factions. I want to have this stranger that comes into town and offers this quest. You can do that. Okay, location. When the actual questing, like, the map and the beating people up happens, try to pick an area that does not have a lot of in-game RP or command spam, right? Like the bazaar, the tavern, stuff like that. It's okay to have players meet up there as the base location, right? But try not to make that where the actual fight is happening. Otherwise, it can be too easy for a conversation to be happening in the tavern as people are trying to fight in the tavern, which, I mean, hey, if there's a fight in the tavern, that happens. But as you're designing the quest, try to consider that, right? Fields are great for this for a reason, and same with the sewers. But hey, if it does happen in the city, it happens in the city. So there you go. Also, the location should be connected to the quest giver and or the nature of the challenge or the enemy. So, again, the Hydra that is at sea attacking the boats is going to be encountered on the high seas, right? They're not going to go out to the grassy fields to fight the Hydra that's attacking the boats. That's a pretty basic one, right? But I hope you understand what I mean there. A location should be related to the quest giver and the nature of the enemy. That can sometimes be a way for you to be inspired as to the location, right? If you've already picked out an enemy, that can help you pick a location. Or if you've already picked out a location, that can help you pick out an enemy. Okay. So the level range. This is all detailed on this link that's right here. And this slideshow, by the way, will be provided in the comments below. Or, sorry, the description below. But more or less what Xanathars will tell you is that you want to kind of balance things to avoid one-shots, right? Like, add up a monster's maximum damage and see, like, okay, well, what's the average hit points for a player in this level range, right? Like, okay, if you've got a level 4 to 5 level range, all right, level 4, so that's a D8. So 3, we'll say that they've got a +1 Constitution modifier, right? So that's 6 times 3 is 18, plus 8 is 24. So at level 4 to 5 level range quest, I want to avoid monsters that can do more than 24 damage in a single hit or in a string of attacks, right? That's one of the reasons why the Deinonychus quest is so deadly, is because if they manage to hit with all 3 attacks, they can get up to that 24 damage. So, like, it's really a test of players' action economy, AC. It's that kind of that gateway quest, right? Like, are you ready to move up into the big leagues? That kind of thing, right? And it's right on that border of players can get killed in one round. It's just that the Deinonychus need to connect with 3 attacks, right? So if they manage to connect with all 3 attacks, or if they knock them prone with the pounce and manage to get 2 out of the extra 3, or rather 2 out of their remaining 3, then that player's down. And that's kind of, it's rough, especially since right off the bat, if you go in there, it's a 1v2. 2 players go in, it's a 3v2. If 3 players go in, it's a 4v3, right? So the number of Deinonychus is increasing, but it's deadlier the fewer people there are. Okay. So the level range can be slim. It can be a 2-level range, like 4 to 5, or it can be broad, like 4 to 10. But if it is broad, then the threat level should be adjustable, right? You can say either, okay, if the total party level is this, right? Okay, so if the total party level is less than 20, then these enemies appear. If the total party level is between 21 and 40, these enemies appear. And if the total party level is above 40, these enemies appear. The Fret quest is very much like this, where there were 3 kind of scaling difficulties according to the party level. Again, you can check the Xanathar's tables to see all about party composition here. I won't go over those tables here. There will be another video where I actually make a quest with you, and we will consult those tables with you, getting a look inside my brain and how I'm thinking as I'm doing this. And then finally, numbers and mixed unit tactics. This can be a big part of the enemy selection as you're considering, the level range once you've considered the enemy selection, right? How many enemies are there, and what weaknesses of the characters are they exploiting? There are some quests, like the Mean Lock quest, right? Where you have an incredible synergy going on between the Vine Blights and the Mean Locks, and the introduction, like the start of it, is very difficult because it's pretty much impossible to ambush the Mean Locks, and almost always the party is going to be starting at a little bit of a disadvantage. If they do really well, they'll be starting kind of neutral, right? But the combination of the Mean Locks and the Vine Blight's mixed unit tactics, the Vine Blight's ability to restrain the players, give them disadvantage on the saves, which then allows the Mean Locks to do their thing. The Mean Locks can paralyze them. Then once they're paralyzed, they start automatically failing the Vine Blight saves again. It's this vicious cycle of the Vine Blights giving the Mean Locks advantage, and then the Mean Locks causing the players to auto-fail the Vine Blight's follow-up saves. So it's brutal. So consider that sort of thing as you're denoting a level range. It's not just the numbers, it's also how well can these units work together to exploit many different weaknesses. Are they just kind of hammering on AC? Is AC the only thing the encounter cares about? The level range probably isn't so high. Same thing for saves. Is it just checking dex saves and wisdom saves pretty much? You know, if it's just like a bunch of cantrips or encounter saves, if it's a bunch of traps, then it's maybe not as high as it seems. It's actually one of the reasons why the bandit quest isn't as in a higher level range, is because the traps are pretty much all saves, and there's actually a number of ways to deal with the traps and the saves. All right, so part one of the reward, this is as you are deciding what the reward should be, right? Again, it should match the quest giver and or the quest. Sometimes it could even be a part of the creature that they're defeating, right? Or an aspect of the environment that they'll be in. You'll want to keep in mind kind of like experience scaling and loot and gold scaling. So if you're having trouble figuring out, well, how much experience reward should this quest give, look at some other quests in a similar level range and how much experience they give, and give kind of like that amount, right? Same thing with the loot and gold scaling. Keep in mind, if you're giving out magic items, basically value them for how much they can be sold at auctions for, because that's what's going to happen to about 80% of these items. So do consider their value, like their base value, as you are scaling the reward appropriate to the level range. Also consider the fact that there are sometimes rewards in the quest, like in bandit hunting and in the roper quest, where players can get magic items and magic item rolls. Keep in mind that there's the horde, there's the magic item table, and then there's also the individual treasure rolls. So there are many ways to reward the players within quest rewards as well. You could also make these rolls the quest givers rewards as well. So you could say, like for example, in the Gazed and Confused, the Gazer quest, the players get a random spell scroll, right? So it's a random scroll. The DM runs that command in order to determine the reward. So the rewards can also just be randomly generated from this as well, not just the in-quest rewards, but also the quest giver rewards as well. Okay, so the flow and the progression. This is just a quick overview of what we're about to go over here on the next few slides. Most quests will go more or less like this. Again, guardrails, not a railroad. Players will start by getting some pre-quest information from the quest giver. The quest giver might give them an item or something like that, right? From then on, they'll go to the area where the quest must be completed. Sometimes they just start right there, like as in the Deinonychus quest or the Centipede quest, right? They just go straight to where the action is, or the rat quest. So you set up the area. From there are search and exploration roles as the players move forward, trying to get to the encounter. Sometimes this is skipped, and we just go straight into the encounter in some of the more straightforward quests. The surprise round and back attack rolls in order to figure out who kind of gets the drop on who. There's the encounter, however that goes. If it's the players beating up monsters, which bonking things on the head is generally how things go, but not always. We're trying to add some more variety to the quests now. You run the encounter, and then there's the cleanup, giving out the reward, or dealing with any sort of player deaths or things like that. So let's move on here to the actual making of the quest, the good stuff. Okay, Prequest Info. So when the players go to the quest giver in order to get some information on the quest, right? Unless the information's all already on the bounty board or it's a well-known quest, right? In that case, they just go do it. But in the case that they go and they check with the quest giver, this is what they do. The quest giver will provide some background information on the importance of the quest to the faction. Maybe a little bit of insight into why they're having adventurers do this. The Maquis or more secretive factions might not just reveal that. They're not going to tell you why you're a pawn. You're an unwitting pawn. Other folks like the Elks and the Ikaika have no problem sharing, everything but classified and confidential information with you. So, the quest giver may also give possible advice or strategies on successful completion. Sometimes they may even provide both mandatory and optional beneficial items like keys or potions or spellcasting services. So, for example, during the Otyug quest, fast food, Razor gives the players the sauce, right? The stinky potion, basically, that will make them irresistible to the Otyug. In another case, the Shadow quest, Father Roan can offer to cast light on the players, which is not necessary, right? It's optional, but it's a service that they offer. So that may be something as well. The quest giver might give them something for use during the quest. Okay, area setup. So when they arrive in the area where the quest occurs, I call it 1010 as far as the detail level, right? If you heard of 2020 vision, right? Okay, I think of 1010 vision as a DM. When folks first walk into an area, you want to describe it with a detail level of 1010. In other words, as though they had 10 passive investigation and 10 passive perception, right? Because this is what most of the people that are there will have. Or not most of the people, but this is going to be the minimum, the lowest often that's going to be present, right? Higher level quests, you can offer some more information if you want, under the assumption that people are going to have higher passives. But generally, when I go into it, I just give things a quick 10-10 description, and if players want to explore some more from there, they can. When you describe the area, the terrain should be obvious. When I say terrain, I mean like the ranger's favored terrain. You can go take a look at the list of those terrains if you need to. If it's not obvious, you can just explicitly say, the terrain is blank, right? It's blank terrain. There's nothing wrong with that. You're the DM. You can just flat out say it. That's okay. So as you're describing the area as well, remember general is better. The weather conditions can change in Hanua. So if you do make something that might be like dependent on the weather, again, guardrails, make sure you're including guidance in the quest for the DM to go and check the weather, right? Say, oh, check the weather, and if it's this, then have this happen. If it's that, have that happen, right? Don't let the weather keep you from making an awesome description. Maybe allow it to enhance that description, right? Might just be a little bit more work for you on the quest building side, and a little bit more work on the DM side when they run it. Again, this is that kind of complexity versus predictability and simplicity balance. And then finally, don't distract players with the area setup. You want to keep things moving. A lot of DMs, a lot of tables have experienced those times where kind of the players can get bogged down in the minutia of what's going on in the room, right? They get distracted by shiny things. This happens with players. Try to reduce the number of shiny things that are in the description. Make it pretty straightforward, like they kind of already know what's going on, right? Again, it's that 10 passive investigation and 10 perception. Like they've already succeeded the role, and this is it. This is what they see. Try not to hint at too much, unless it's incredibly obvious. Again, 10-10. Okay. So finding a map. Of course, you can make your own map as well. You're more than welcome to. So the base pixels per square, or I guess like, it's 40, or, 40 by 40, I should say. It's not 40 pixels per square. That's a typo there. I'll fix that. But it's a 40 by 40 pixel square. You can change that in the map settings. That should also be exclamation point map. Another error I'll need to fix. But yeah, the base resolution for the grid in Avrae is 40 by 40 pixel squares. You can change that resolution in the map settings. I find for map shapes that the horizontal is superior to the vertical map. It fits better on the Discord screen, I feel. Easier for players to see everything. You want to try to aim for a size between 12 by 8 and 24 by 16, right? Being too big, like players aren't going to be able to read the enemy markings, or be able to see things on the map that might be interactable, right? So anything else might be too big. There is the view command, which can allow the DM to change what the player is looking at, right? Like what section of the map the player is looking at. But if you're going to make a big map, then you'll be the one in charge of making that happen. Or rather, including the view command pieces there. Okay, so player and enemy start locations, and also trap start locations if there are traps, right? As you're looking at the map and deciding on a map, you'll want to keep those things in mind, right? Where are the enemies starting? Where are the traps located? Are there other environmental factors to consider? Difficult terrain? Things along those lines. And then where are the players going to be starting? What size square? Or is it going to be a rectangle? Or do they have the option of starting in different areas? For example, like in the pirate quest with Lana, right? Players can either sneak in the back with Lana and start, or they can burst in the side door once the fight starts and kind of flank, right? So there might be multiple starting locations. Or there might be multiple starting locations depending on whether the players ambush the enemies or vice versa, or if it's neutral. So as you're looking at the map as well, keep in mind that the map, the terrain, what's going on, the distance that the enemies start from the players, the enemy should have the home field advantage, right? For the non-sports field, sports game fans out there, home field advantage basically means, when you're playing on your home field, when your team is playing at home, you've got the fans, your stadium because you play half your games there, you know exactly how far it is from one spot to another spot. You've got just that energy, right? Because it's your home field. So enemies have this too in the area that they call home. They have that home field advantage. So the map should reflect that. The terrain, things that are going on. If enemies have a swim speed or the ability to control water or abilities that involve fire, make sure that these things are on the map, Okay. So search and exploration roles. This is something that is not included in every quest, right? It's something that is in some quests in lieu of multiple encounters, right? So rather than fighting this group of enemies, and then that group of enemies, and then that group of enemies, and then finally you beat the quest enemies. sometimes there will be search and exploration roles which can allow players to circumvent battles or to really get the drop on enemies. Um, these should generally have some measure of risk and reward or build interplay stacked up in them, right? So, maybe they really favor characters with high stealth or high investigation or characters that have certain tool proficiencies. Um, or, hey, if they fail this check, then they take some damage, right? Like, yeah, you're walking through the woods, you fail your survival check, and you walk through some sharp brambles, everybody takes a d4 damage or 2d4 damage, whatever it might be, right? So there can be these kind of search and exploration rolls that people make beforehand as they're looking for the enemies. In the Gazer quest, this is basically used to see, hey, do you even find it, or do you find some other enemy, right? These are still really underutilized. I have mostly unused here, but I should say underutilized. In Hanua, there's a lot of potential to build these into your quests as a sort of first encounter, especially in a higher level quest, if you want to kind of speed things along and not have a full-on combat, right? Like in the second level of bandit hunting. Although there's a lot of traps in that one. It almost is like a full-on second combat encounter. But depending on how players play it and how lucky they get, it can go a lot faster. So you can use that as sort of like I say, first encounter in a higher level quest. Okay, so the surprise round versus the back attack. Once the players actually reach the quest destination and there's the enemies, the creatures, the obstacles, whatever that they're facing, there's generally a series of rolls to see if the players can approach with stealth without being seen, or if they're seen before they manage to approach successfully. These manage to add a layer of randomness to the encounter, and again, they build another layer of interplay, right? The heavy armor characters with the high AC that fear combat a little bit less, they are more apt to give the party away. Whereas if you got a really non-combat, or rather a party of non-defensive, we'll say, characters, it can be really handy to have that first round to just lay on a thick offensive, take out some DPS on the enemy side of the field, and then go from there, right? So it can feel a lot more organic and rewarding, too, because it's rewarding players according to how they build. And also, it's not always going to go the same way, right? Different groups and different parties are going to have different outcomes a lot of the time, right? As you're building your DCs, check the passives of the characters, of the creatures that are kind of like the sentry creatures, if you will, right? Sometimes you can just use the highest passives in a group. That's fine. If there are multiple sentry creatures, or in other words, if the creatures are just kind of doing their thing, maybe just use the flat passive for the DC, even if there's multiple creatures, right? But if there are multiple sentry creatures, in other words, there's creatures that kind of have their eye out for danger, then give them advantage on that passive DC. Give them another +5, right? So instead of having a 12 perception, they would have a 17 perception because they have two of these creatures kind of on watch. So that could be a good way to increase the defensiveness of an encounter if you feel like, hey, these creatures with a passive 8 perception are just going to get snuck up on almost every time. I'm going to say that there's multiple sentry creatures here and give them advantage on that perception DC. And keep in mind that the passives are the DCs. So as players are rolling a passive perception to look around to try to find them, they need to meet or beat the stealth DC of the creature that's out there. So if the creature has a 13 passive stealth, the players need to roll a 13 or higher, right? That's the DC that they're rolling to beat. And then the same is true when the players are rolling their stealth against the monster's passive perception. In this case, the passive perception is the DC. The players are trying to roll their stealth and get that number or higher. So there you go. The passive stat is the DC. Okay. Encounter setup. This is pretty much setting up your Google document, right? So that all of the quest masters in the future will be able to run it behind you. You're going to set up all of your commands, like adding the DM, adding the monsters. You're going to make sure that you've added the map. You're going to include information in the line about adding monsters, about how many monsters to add according to the number of combatants or whatever other factors might be at play, right? Maybe things that happened earlier during the exploration part. You're going to have to set up the map as well. The heights of any creatures that might be involved, their sizes, their placement, their colors, their tokens. You're going to need the map size, all of this sort of stuff. You're also going to need to give any player guidance commands. For example, place yourself in the blue square using the command blah 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 for a lower level quest. Or for a higher level quest, you might need to say things like, oh, the elusive roper is indistinguishable from stone. Use a wisdom check with a perception check with disadvantage, or a mason's tools regularly in order to try to find it, right? So any guidance commands you might need to give the players right there at round 0. You'll also need to include in the document stats and attacks for the creatures, just a quick at-a-glance sort of thing. You don't need to put everything in there. You'll be able to see in the sample video that we go through kind of how much I put in there. If you have access to the Questmaster documents because you're a Questmaster, you can see how much is in all of the other quests as well. You also will want to write in attack patterns for your creatures. These can be really basic, simple, and straightforward, or they can be more complex and advanced. It should always reflect the wisdom and intelligence of the creature that you're dealing with, and also their intent, right? That can all be tied up in the purpose of the quest as well. And then finally, just going back real quick, the attack patterns for the creatures being tied up in the purpose of the quest. For example, in Ghostbusters, the Wraith and the Ghasts are trying to open up the doors and then stall the players. The Wraith is trying to stall the players and then turn the cultists into specters, and the cultists are just trying to kill each other, right? So those are the attack patterns based on quest objectives. Those attack patterns might be different if the quest objectives were different, right? It might just be all the enemies mob the players. But in this case, that's not the quest objective. So, or rather, the quest objective isn't kill everything. It's save these people. Oops. And then finally, any special conditions or dialogue that you might need to add to the encounter. And I don't mean just information about conditions. There might be enemy abilities that you need to expand upon, or special dialogue. Like if an enemy is going to behave a certain way at a certain time, you might need to include that. The quest fast food is a great example of this. Pretty much the entire quest is just all special conditions, right? Because it's a pursuit. It's a very atypical quest. So it's basically just special conditions and dialogue the entire time. Okay, victory or defeat. There should be a nice little victory line in there that emphasizes the result that the players have won, or if it's been a partial victory, that it's been a partial victory. It should imply that. You then have the command for the players adding their rewards, adding their experience, any loot that they might have. If the field strip is obvious, then you can, or rather, if the field strip, such as with the cockatrice, then let them know the command for that. However, if it's not, such as with the Deinonychus, right? Although they do need the heads of the Deinonychus. So, yeah, you might want to tell them, hey, make sure you field strip these things, right? Get the stuff. But you don't have to, especially for the higher level quests, right? If it's a multi-encounter, a higher level quest, you don't have to include in there for every single enemy on a random encounter table, oh, make sure you field strip this monster, blah, 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 blah. Players should be able to figure that out by level 5. Then finally, death or defeat. It's possible that the players die. One player dies, or more than one player dies, or all the players die, or they fail to meet the victory conditions, right? Like, say, in Ghostbusters, all the humans die, and the Wraith gets away. And what then, right? So what does defeat look like? Or if the players die, what happens? Is it a fate worse than death, such as with the Meanlocks? If the players die in the company of the Meanlocks, they're in for some real trouble. If the players die to the cockatrice petrification, that's not so bad, right? And again, these things are kind of scaled to the level of the players. Lower level deaths have lower penalties. They're easier to recover from. Higher level deaths are harder to recover from and have harsher penalties. And then finally, repetition. As I said before, almost all of these quests should be repeatable, but make sure you add an element in there that addresses players wanting to immediately repeat the quest. So they're already in the quest area, they've completed it at one time. Is there anything specific that's going to happen if they want to just immediately do the quest again? Can they do the quest again? Or does the enemy need some time to regenerate? Or do they need to go to a different area? Do they have to go back to the kind of like exploration encounter, go through that, and then find another one of these enemies? Or is it just a simple, okay, you make another roll from the surprise attack round? Whatever it is, figure out how the quest is going to be repeated. Or if it's like the rat quest, where it's just endless waves, right? Endless waves that get progressively harder. Okay, and then part 2 of the reward. This is you reminding the players once the quest is done where to pick up their reward. So, as the DM, you say, remember to pick up your quest reward at the East Gate the next time you visit, right? Then you go to the East Gate, you post the reward dialogue, you post the commands that people need to do in order to add items, add gold, add experience, whatever. Always post the commands. Post them for reputation as well. If it is likely the first time that someone might have done one of these reputation quests, like if it's in levels 1 through 5, put in the reputation add command as well as the reputation edit command. You'll know what I mean if you've done these before. Not done these, I mean like done these quests, not made these quests. And then finally, scaling rewards and partial completion. So if the players haven't quite fully finished the quest, maybe they don't get all of the rewards, or depending on what level range of a quest they finished, right? Like, okay, was a total party level under 20? Was it between 21 and 40? Was it over 40? You might have different rewards based on that. And approval. When you're ready to submit a quest for approval, you will do so in character dev, quest development. There's a thread there that you will be able to submit. Go to the thread, check the pin in the thread, and you will see a template that you can use for submitting the quest. The quest will need the approval of 2 GMs in order to be published. If a GM gets back to you with some feedback on some things that maybe need to change about the quest, have some dialogue with the GM. If you feel that it's not quite right, like, hey, I don't think it would fit this or that. But other than that, realize and recognize that the GMs have designed and been a part of designing a lot of these quests before. They know a whole lot. So do try to take their advice to heart if they give you some, and make the changes. Or consider how some changes might be able to be made, right? Again, we want to make sure that players and DMs are all having fun. We've run a lot of these quests from the DM side of things, so we know when some things might take the DM too much. And you know what? As you're making these quests, you might start seeing that yourself as well. So after that, we'll finalize and post the quest details to the actual quest tab. You will demonstrate how the quest is run by DMing the inaugural run of the quest, whether or not you have DM privileges. So if you write a quest, you will run the first run of the quest, whether that's just a test run with me or some other DMs or public, whatever it is, you will run it so that you can demonstrate to everybody else how it's run. You're taking that responsibility for it as it's your quest. And then finally, this is optional. If you want, you can record a quest primer of how to run the quest. So basically, you in the Google Doc and in Discord running the quest from your side of things, saying, hey, this is what I'm doing as the QM going through this. And then finally, resolution. Once all that has been done, The quest will be posted to Quest. The update will be posted to dev updates so that the quest is there and live. And then part of making the quest is the idea that there's this continuous improvement of it, right? So observe future runs of the quest, whether you run it or someone else does, and reflect on improvements, right? Like how can enemy attack patterns be improved, or how can the setup be improved marginally? How can the rewards maybe better be balanced, either to be more loot friendly or to be more appropriate and in line with the other quests at that level? Whatever it is, just observe and see what you see, right? It's all about that continuous improvement. And then finally, if you feel that the quest should at one point be drawn to an inevitable conclusion, or if you feel like there's a series of events that, hey, if these things happen during a quest, then the quest is resolved, or the quest changes in some way, or it's altered, or it's removed, or this other faction becomes responsible for it, or the victory condition changes, whatever it happens to be, right? You can continue to develop these sort of things into the quest on its initial release, and also as the quest is played in the future. And that is everything. So there will be another video, a follow-up to this one, about me making a quest. Well, not about me making a quest, me making a quest alongside you. We're going to make this quest together. We will pretty much be going through all of these things step by step that I just went through. We talked about it very broadly, kind of applied to all of the quests on the Hanua server and all the different quests that you might build for it. But we're now going to go through with this next video and talk more specifically about each one of these kind of tied to this example quest to really give you a model of what all of this looks like in execution. Because otherwise, I'm kind of just talking about a lot of nonsense, right? If you can't actually visualize how it all comes together. So, if you are ready, go ahead and move on to that next video. If you want to review this again, you can. Again, you'll be able to find all of these slides in the description below. So, yeah. Anyways, good luck quest building and running the quests and all that sort of stuff. See you later.